It began just before the interval, that precise moment when anticipation for dry ginger peaks and tempers among the St. Egberts over 60s run low. The Thursday night bingo was in full swing, the glare of overhead bulbs harsh against the regimental rows of card-armed pensioners. Mrs. Ida Pringle, unfailingly punctual, once on the parish rate committee, was at the microphone about to call the fourth line. She looked at her card, blinked, and inhaled. Something had gone awry. 72. No, pardon, 16, she faltered. There was an audible ripple, a misplaced giggle, then irritation. Cards shuffled, eyes narrowed. It was Wilfred Chubb, bulbous of nose and recent proprietor of Chubb's Removals, who spotted it first. His card, filled out by the church secretary, was missing not one but two numbers. The winning line, the necessary line, could not exist. Mrs. Pringle's hand fluttered dramatically. She barked a laugh that sounded far too close to tears. "I don't understand." The microphone buzzed with anxious static. From the back row, church treasurer Mr. Queeley rose, beetling. "Has someone tampered?" Mrs. Rowena Flinch clutched her lucky marker. "It's always the outsiders, isn't it?" "January snipe," the junior librarian hissed. "Didn't I say the balls would run out?" Sid, the caretaker, resplendent in his faded mac, whispered loudly. "We never had this sort of thing under Mrs. Dainty." Mrs. Greaves, stalwart of the Flower Guild, declared, "Bingo is a sacred trust." Sacred! In the tense hush, a lone cry from somewhere behind the tea table. "Mine has 3 16s. Cards were inspected and contested. A mound of confusion rose, threatening to topple the entire night's dignity. Amid the paper flurry, an odd detail emerged, a single daffodil head, wilted, incongruously perched atop the portable bingo cage. Not quite decorative, not quite accidental. Inspector Purbright, newly arrived from his evening stroll, took in the scene with mild interest. He nodded to Sergeant Love, who had begun counting balls with laborious concentration. Purbright tapped the daffodil with one gloved finger. "The spring bloom must have lost its bearings, though perhaps it's more at home among numbers than among vases." A pause, his eyes lingered over the row of unclaimed prizes, the uneven alignment of chairs. Silence, then an abrupt shriek from Mrs. Pringle, whose handbag, gaping and undignified, revealed between her handkerchief and those dreadful peppermints-folded notes. Hastily printed, ungrammatical, and missing a crucial signature. Mrs. Pringle paled. The note was addressed to the dearest winner. It read, "Don't call Thursday. Prize not safe." The room, already uncomfortable, shifted as one. All eyes found Purbright or tried, for he was quietly examining the tea-urn's tap. And outside in the crisply indifferent street, a solitary figure retreated, hat brim pulled low, coat hem brushing a trail of scuffed confetti. The hush lingered in St. Ermentrude's nave, far longer than one would expect after a Thursday bingo disruption. The typed note, now resting awkwardly between Sergeant Love's determined fingers and 3 half-eaten custard creams, had exerted its presence over even the most quarrelsome parishioners. Mrs. Axrill, still the portrait of muddled indignity, remained seated while Reverend Plimsy hovered near the piano, eyes shifting, his occasional cough more stage-prompt than genuine ailment. Inspector Purbright, never rushing the moment, surveyed the gathered faces with that mild gaze which, the older ladies said, could turn your secrets to vinegar if you looked too long. He bent, retrieving the hymn sheet with a momentary flutter, as its green corner brushed his fingertips and tucked it away without comment. There would be time for speculation. The Flaxborough mind, he'd learned, was rarely idle. The chatter began to recover, a chorus of confusion and self-importance. Ivy from the fish stall, sensing opportunity, leaned towards Mrs. Dropper and whispered, "Why type a note for bingo? It's not like the mayor's pageant." Mrs. Dropper, who specialised in pricing knickers at a suspiciously even rate, nodded sagely. But suspicion, like ginger wine, burns suddenly. That green print someone from the council office? Peggy types everything green. Peggy, eyes darting, feigned concentration on her raffle strip. Sid, the caretaker, now exercised the piano stool, searching for cracks that might betray conspiracy. "This wood's cheap," he announced. "Someone's been sitting heavy or anxious lately." Miss Truswell, who liked her anxiety strictly confidential, bristled. "It was Bloxham last week after he lost his tab. He's heavier than the hymnals, you know." Purbright approached the card table, the crowd shifting, partly to make room, partly to escape the scrutiny. Sergeant Love followed, notebook at the ready, already perspiring with a sense of duty. "Bloxham won the card last week, but this is his handwriting," Purbright said quietly, examining the original numbers penciled on the prize card. Could it be that Mrs. Axrill simply picked up the wrong one, or has some kind soul helped her do so? Mrs. Axrill looked wounded. "I barely see these days. If I snatched a card, it was a pure mistake." No one quite believed her, but the Flaxborough ethic preferred its doubt, civilly served. Plimsy's eyebrows, ungovernable once suspense took hold, rose alarmingly. Sergeant Love, less subtle, inquired, "Who was near the cards when you collected them, Mrs. Axrill?" She folded her trembling hands. "Peggy was sorting, but she's never careless." Sid watched over those cards of the guards as if they were church silver. Peggy, council secretary and part-time shuffler of all vital documentation, looked stricken. "I sorted, as always, a single pile, each name ticked. I'd swear nothing was amiss, except Mrs. Axrill said her usual seat was taken." Eyes veered toward Wilfrid Chubb, now 3 squares deep into a biscuit, and gazing elsewhere. Purbright's glance was patient, almost gentle. "Your seat moved, Mrs. Axrill." She coloured. "This evening, yes, I thought I'd try near the window. Light's better for the numbers, you know. Wilfrid normally sits there, but he was late. I took his place and, well, perhaps his card." Wilfrid mumbled something incoherent, crumbs collecting on his lapel. "Didn't see my card, so I used another. Someone must have muddled the pile." His guilt was the resigned, communal kind. Flaxborough did not rush to cast blame when confusion could suffice. Purbright turned the hymn sheet over, studying its faint green numerals. "Does anyone recognize this? Odd time for a hymn to be out of order. Reverend Plimsy," voice reedy, piped up. "We print all hymn sheets in black, Inspector." Green was discontinued 3 years ago by the vestry. Love scribbled diligently. "So this one is old stock? Where might it have come from?" "Anywhere," Plimsy shrugged. "The vestry cupboard, the choir loft, or someone's pocket." Town gossip gathered momentum with every implication. Bert at the pub, half a street away but newly acquainted with the scandal by virtue of his wife's swift feet, declared, "If there's a note, there's a grievance. Someone wants the prize to go wrong." Not the first time either. Miss Truswell, who catalogued slights with a librarian's rigour, whispered, "The Flower Guild was denied last week's tea tray." Mrs. Greaves was livid about the cutlery incident, remember? But Mrs. Greaves, formidable in tartan and reputation, would not comment. She instead arranged her flower pins into a geometrically suspect line and glared at Bloxham. People meddling never do so alone. This was planned. Sergeant Love sorted the note, hymn sheet, and 2 questionable cards. Who, if anyone, might benefit or be harmed if the bingo went astray? Peggy bristled. "There's always someone who grumbles. Last season, Mrs. Docking swore the numbers were cursed. I've heard Sid grumble about prize money and say it goes in circles, not pockets." Sid, for his part, said nothing, but his handling of the stool grew more pronounced. Purbright collected every detail calmly, letting the anxiety around him rise and recede. The note speaks of virtue tripping. Was there any dispute over virtue recently? Plimsy looked discomfited. Parish committee 3 meetings ago. Bloxham argued for repair work. Axrill wanted a donation for choir robes. A lively session, shall we say? Love nodded. Any lasting bitterness? Bloxham returned to muttering about biscuits. Miss Truswell's silence was a verdict of sorts. Throughout the conversation, Purbright made no direct accusations. His questions circled, gentle but insistent, as he catalogued not just what people answered, but how they shifted in their seats, how Mrs. Axrill's fingers knotted and Peggy's eyes tracked the corners of the nave. Even as the meeting wound down and participants drifted to the side table for tepid tea, the sense of conspiracy clung to the air, reluctant to clear. The typed note, the displaced card, and the lone green hymn sheet became the evening's trifecta of unease. Outside, dusk pressed in. Purbright lingered, watching as Bert's wife sprinted past, carrying updates to Bert, and in turn the Red Lion's evening cohort. Flaxborough's network had reached saturation. Tomorrow's market would seethe with theories most unprintable. Love tidied the remaining papers into his notebook. "You think it's more than a silly mix-up, sir?" Purbright's response was mild as ever. "In Flaxborough, even a mix-up carries echoes. Let us suppose the echoes are, for now, uncooperative." As parishioners departed, some silent, some exchanging lively, misinformed summaries, 2 things became clear to Purbright. The person responsible was either very careless or very precise, and the next clue, as ever, would arrive tangled in someone's attempt to tidy everything away. Night fell, and as the last of the church's lights dimmed, a figure paused by the vestry, glancing in as if searching for something overlooked. The hymn sheet, now in Purbright's pocket, seemed oddly heavier. Inspector Purbright awoke early the next morning, not by the insistent ringing of his alarm, but by the peculiar suspicion that Flaxborough's collective nerves would vibrate long after the bingo scandal. He found Sergeant Love waiting outside his office, hair imperfectly combed and face set in permanent expectation. "We've reports, sir," Love intoned, holding 3 sheets sprung with gossip. "Pub crowd," says Mrs. Greaves, confronted Bloxham by the fountain and accused him of creative card management. And Mrs. Axrill's been seen buying lemon drops in bulk, which Peggy claims is a signal for something. Love hesitated, brow furrowed. There's also talk of Sid in the market, arguing that church repairs are a racket. Reverend Plimsy refused to comment on hymn sheets, citing matters above his pay grade. Purbright examined the sheets as though expecting confessions to rise from the margins. "Let's avoid the market for now. People are rarely candid before noon," he said. Love's relief was palpable. "I suggest we pay Mrs. Axrill a visit. Often those amidst scandal are more articulate in their own sitting rooms." The morning air in Axrill's garden was damp, scented faintly of parsley and defeat. Her house, neat but slightly too perfect, betrayed the presence of someone perpetually expecting inspection. Mrs. Axrill received them in a parlour that bristled with certificates and faded group photos. She poured tea with rigid ceremony, as if the day's claims might dissolve in hot water. "I'd like you to describe, in your own words, the moment of discovery last night," Purbright said gently. Mrs. Axrill set down the teapot with surgical precision, hands trembling, but voice unexpectedly measured. It was all so sudden. "I reached for my usual card, but the pile was thinner than customary. I sat near the window, I told you, for the light. Then I checked my card twice. When the numbers matched Bloxham's, I feared for my reputation." Love, notebook poised, leaned in.
Do you recall anyone crowding the table, Mrs. Axrill? Sid? Peggy? She considered, mouth pursed. Peggy was sorting, yes, and Sid hovered, as always. But there was a moment just after I arrived when Reverend Plimsy fussed with the hymn sheets. He seemed out of sorts. She glanced at Purbright, uneasy. Does it matter about the hymn sheets? Purbright smiled faintly. In Flaxborough, the smallest disruption can matter. Was anything else out of the ordinary? She hesitated. Only when Bloxham entered late did he look flustered, and his collar was unfastened. She blushed. I suppose that's nothing. Love wrote methodically, the scrape of pencil a comforting anchor. Purbright sipped his tea, eyes straying over the room, noting a collection of choir programs filed with improbable care. They thanked Mrs. Axrill and made for Peggy's council office next, a space redolent of ink and ambitious paperwork. Peggy, alert and defensive, greeted them with a hint of wounded pride. If anyone doubts my system, they're wrong. Every card counted, every name ticked, she declared, hands poised above an unsorted stack. But Bloxham was late. He always grumbles, saying Sid favours his own friends for prizes. Mrs. Axrill, meanwhile, is too nervous to swap anything intentionally. Purbright studied Peggy with his familiar mild intensity. And the hymn sheet is the one printed in green? Peggy grimaced. Old stock, surely. Sometimes Sid pulls things from cupboards to look busy. Reverend Plimsy put in a requisition for more black ink last month, but the council said no. The choir loft is crammed with leftovers. Anyone could wander up there. Love scribbled, flipping the preceding page. Who handles hymn sheets before services? Peggy shrugged. Mostly Plimsy, occasionally Mrs. Greaves if flowers need rearranging, and Sid, of course, claims his duties cover everything but sermons. Outside, market gossip was cresting. Bert recounted to 3 listeners, it's a curtain job, someone inside, someone out. Cards misplaced, hymn sheets planted its sabotage, plain as nettles. Ivy's fish stall conversation splintered the choir's unhappiness since those robe funds vanished. Bloxham's son failed his music exam. Sid hates tea trays. There's a pattern. Purbright and Love crossed to Sid's house, battered and situated between 2 competing interpretations of tasteful rockery. Sid met them with wary formality, hands stained if not by bingo ink, then by good honest grime. I've said before, Sid grunted, these little messes grow in committee rooms, not the nave. Cards are safe unless someone wants trouble. Mrs. Axrill's mistake and Bloxham's lateness are irritants. As for hymn sheets, I found one yesterday behind the urn, green print. Meant to bin it, but Plimsy said to save it for children's numbers game.
Love eyed Sid's hands. Was anyone near the cupboards yesterday? Sid shrugged, eyeing his garden for escape. Mrs. Greaves fetched flower pins and Plimsy trotted about. Peggy dropped by for tape. All at separate times as far as I know. I stuck to repairs except moving the bingo cage after tea. The chain of events sharpened in Purbright's mind, not to clarity, but to a sense that someone's series of small, deliberate acts had nudged the evening toward chaos. Leaving Sid, Purbright and Love walked to the square. Flaxborough's rhythms continued, yet every corner seemed charged with implication. Mrs. Greaves, flanked by Flower Guild deputies, intercepted them on the steps of the town hall. "You're asking about cards?" she snapped, floral pins in combat alignment. "I know sabotage when I see it. Last spring, choir books vanished for a week. Don't trust anyone with keys, not even Sid. But Mrs. Axrill's nerves tell her she's not clever enough. Bloxham, meanwhile, will blame anyone but himself." Love gently inquired, "Who else went near the choir loft yesterday?" Mrs. Greaves tightened her lips. "Plimsy and Peggy, and Wilfred Chubb is up for everything, except the actual choir." The day whisked forward through increasingly barbed conversations. Schoolchildren speculated on bingo fraud. while an elderly man muttered about the great licorice heist of 1982. Flaxborough had a way of dragging former scandals back into the current. With the evidence collected, Purbright suggested a walk by the church. The nave, sun-spotted and empty, seemed sensible enough, but a disturbance near the choir loft drew attention to voices, sharp and then muffled. They found Bloxham in an agitated conversation with Plimsy, both unusually animated. Bloxham shouted, "You're not telling me someone swapped cards for fun?" Plimsy's response, thin and defensive, rebuffed any suggestion of negligence. Purbright's presence calmed them by degrees. "Gentlemen, a question. Did either of you notice hymn sheets out of place?" Plimsy admitted reluctantly that I saw a green print near the choir and tossed it back in the pile. Bloxham, sweating, shook his head. "I saw nothing except Axrill's card by the table. I swear mine was missing." Purbright's eyes lingered on the piles of hymn sheets, the peculiar alignment of the bingo cage, and the faint trace of green ink along the table's edge. As the morning ebbed, one further incident set the wheels of suspicion turning. Ivy rushed in from the square, breathless and triumphant. "There's a prize missing from the market raffle. Mrs. Docking swears it was there an hour ago. Flower Guild's basket is gone completely. Someone's collecting more than cards." For Purbright, the investigation's next phase was clear. Someone in Flaxborough had an appetite for mischief that extended beyond mere bingo. Watching the sunlight shift across the nave, he allowed a thin, unreadable smile, the sort that made people nervous for reasons they couldn't name. The news of the missing market raffle prize spread across Flaxborough with a velocity usually reserved for reports of crumbling gravestones or bakery discounts. The Flower Guild's basket, an elaborate creation of unevenly arranged carnations, a bottle of questionable sherry and, by local tradition, 2 useful kitchen implements, one perpetually unidentifiable, had vanished from its plinth beneath the bunting in the market hall. Mrs. Docking was seen soon after, flapping at the market supervisor in a posture of injured authority, declaring, "If people can't keep their mitts off the flowers, what chance has decency?" Inspector Purbright, accompanied by Sergeant Love, arrived as suspicions thickened. The market hall was a cacophony of huffing indignation and covert satisfaction. Flaxborough's residents never quite trusted a prize that remained unmolested this long. Love surveyed the scene through earnest but ill-fitting officialdom. Basket was here at opening. Mrs. Greaves set it up. Docking kept watch till 10. Greaves took a walk. Sid fixed a light above the hall door. Or said he did. After that, who knows? Purbright, as was custom, said very little. He noted the precise angle of the vacant plinth, the scuff marks arrayed in peculiar triangles beneath the bunting, and the stray thread from a green ribbon that clung incongruously to the edge. Something about the thread complemented yesterday's green hymn sheet, unsettling in its quiet implication. Mrs. Greaves herself arrived, flanked by Peggy and 2 silent Flower Guild acolytes. "Inspector," she began, less a greeting than a summons to judgment. "If misconduct extends to market prizes, the committee will have my resignation." Purbright resisted an urge to observe that Flaxborough's committees ran naturally on perpetual threats of desertion. Peggy added in official tones, "The basket was accounted for at 9:45. Sid repaired the light, then left to fetch tea bags for the council canteen. The only ones near afterward were Docking, myself, and Mrs. Chubb, who brought surplus raffle tickets. Mrs. Docking, never shy, interjected, "It's Chubb, I think, Wilfrid's wife. She's always restless near the prizes, and Wilfrid was talking numbers in the corner. Axrill passes by, but she keeps to herself." Suspicion bloomed, watered well by old turf wars. Purbright asked nothing about Mrs. Chubb's family at first. Instead, he swung his mild gaze to Sid, who hovered by the light switch with an engineer's pride and a bystander's caution. "Sid, did you change the bulb at 10? Did anything strike you as odd?" Sid grunted. The plinth was loose. Someone banged it overnight. I saw a green ribbon at the corner, tied badly. Greaves always double knots, so it wasn't her touch. Mrs. Greaves bristled at Sid's implication. If a ribbon slipped, it was sabotage. None of my guild would be careless. Bert, drawn by the commotion, arrived clutching a folded racing sheet. There's betting at the bookies. It'll turn up at the Red Lion by afternoon. I'm giving 2 to 1. It was a woman who did too neat a job otherwise. This sparked a slew of market whispers. Axrill's desperate for sherry. Chubb hates carnations. Peggy's always short on gifts, and Greaves will frame Sid if pushed. Sergeant Love jotted down names like a man convinced of their future relevance. Purbright, meanwhile, watched the crowd. Mrs. Chubb entered, cheeks flushed, and resolved freshly minted, as though she'd come prepared for a contest more serious than flower baskets. I came for tickets. I saw Peggy, Sid, and Docking. The basket was safe, then suddenly not. I left after buying tickets for Wilfred's fundraiser. Peggy raised a brow. Tickets were for the fire brigade, not Wilfred's removals. Mrs. Chubb stiffened. I was asked to help with both, Peggy. Purbright leaned in, friendly, but pointed. And you know carnations well. Would you ever select sherry over wine for a guild prize? Mrs. Chubb managed a polite pause, a feint neither admission nor denial. Our usual is wine, but Mrs. Greaves insisted. I gathered extra flowers yesterday for the basket. Perhaps someone else adjusted them. The subtlety of accusation hung in the air. Love's scribbled hands sweaty. Sid inspected his shoes. Mrs. Docking muttered, "People move in pairs at the market, hardly ever alone." From the periphery, Ivy lurched forward. I saw Sid near the basket, and he dropped his keys. And Mrs. Axrill was arguing with Chubb about raffle math. Docking was serving tea. Peggy was sorting tickets. Could have been anyone. The myriad rivalries and cross-currents converged, none quite so strong as to be decisive. Purbright glanced at the ribbon, the green thread quietly treacherous. He pocketed it with an understated air of finality. The market began to clear, anxious for tea, anxious for news. Purbright led Love to the Flower Guild side room, cluttered with accounting books and old ribbons in various states of hopefulness. He asked, "Mrs. Greaves, were all the ribbons accounted for yesterday evening?" Greaves hesitated, less combative now. "We use green for anniversaries. All should be locked with the prize supplies, but sometimes guild members borrow them. Mrs. Docking needed some last month for a church display." Love asked, "Does anyone else use the supply?" Axrill does, for her garden society. Peggy borrows occasionally. Sid for repairs. Chubb never. She paused, considering. He prefers fresh flowers to fussy ribbons. Love checked the records for each entry in the supply book written in Peggy's tight script, with rare notes in Mrs. Greaves's hand. The green ribbon's last entry, dated 3 weeks ago, was the Still Garden show. Purbright, growing ever quieter, directed Sergeant Love to compare handwriting with the note from the previous night. Love laid papers side by side, but the envelope script suggested neither Peggy nor Docking, nor Mrs. Chubb. The only similar curve belonged faintly to Mrs. Still, the nervous loop of an age-spotted hand. "Too easy," Purbright murmured. If someone wished to frame Mrs. Axrill, theirs would be the handwriting most like hers. The market hall emptied, its bunting sagging and plinth abandoned. But as Purbright watched Sid lock the doors, Peggy lingered, her gaze tracing the plinth's outline. A moment later she returned, whispering to Love, "A basket can't simply vanish. Check the choir loft tonight. The guild sometimes stores prizes there." Purbright nodded, more to himself than to her. The choir loft is overdue for a visit. Outside, the town buzzed with rumours nearing fever pitch, bingo, baskets, and ribbons, now curled together into one serpentine tail. Bert wagered new odds at the Red Lion. Mrs. Docking threatened council action. Sid, subdued, vanished toward his shed. And above it all, Purbright's detachment seemed both balm and provocation. As dusk settled, Sergeant Love, true to duty, prepared a torch and notebook for the evening's loft inspection. Purbright surveyed Flaxborough as one might a chessboard figures shifting, motives half revealed, and the town awaiting its next unwelcome revelation. Sergeant Love's approach to the choir loft was straight from the Flaxborough School of Careful Investigation, torch held like an invitation, notebook primed for anything from grand confession to spotted mould. The evening was thick with the sort of suspense that huddles quietly in shadowed rafters. Flaxborough's church echoed beneath his footsteps, the nave filtering the after-hours hush through upended chairs and the pervading faint aroma of brass polish. Inspector Purbright, arriving a pace behind, surveyed the loft with an attention less towards dust and more to the residues of human intent. If a prize had been hidden here, it would be by hands proficient in misdirection and habitual in self-justification. Love's torchbeam caught at old hymnals piled beside a battered stand. A faint green thread likely kin to the market ribbon curled beneath a choir robe with the air of unintended evidence. Love bent with polite thoroughness. Basket would have fit there, sir. No sign of it, but someone's been here. Robes, too. He straightened, then noticed a scrap of card wedged behind the hymn books, a bingo card penciled with numbers not fully erased and flecked with icing sugar, a minor trace of Axtill's well-documented fondness for tea cakes. Purbright plucked it free, reading the pale notations before tucking the card away with no comment. Sid's maintenance ledgers sat open on a side table. A passing glance revealed 2 logged light repairs, but also notes on choir loft access and keys borrowed by Peggy and Mrs. Docking for various official purposes. Love copied the dates carefully, never one to trust recall over record. As they descended to find the church doors locked and the market square quieter than usual, Purbright paused beside Sid's shed, lamplight framing Sid, inside at work over a piece of broken market plinth. They knocked. Sid admitted them without complaint, the air dense with sawdust and a residue of irritation. "Basket didn't pass through here?" Sid insisted, voice clipped. "The loft's crowded, but not with prizes." "Saw Peggy near the choir books late yesterday." Greaves checked ribbons. Docking looked for hymnals carrying a lunch bag and claimed Mrs. Chubb sent biscuits, but I never saw any left behind. Love recorded it all, the audience to Sid's narrative so earnest that even Purbright allowed himself a rare, questioning glance. "Did you notice Mrs. Axrill or Wilfred Chubb yesterday by the hall?" Sid's gaze sharpened, then waned. Chubb was at the market outside for a spell, talking up his raffle. Axrill stayed distant. If she went up the choir loft, it was after I'd locked it at 5. The search continued, methodical and mostly unrewarding except for the green thread, iced bingo card, and Sid's note on key pieces of a puzzle cut by hands practiced at small deceptions. Love, ever patient, proposed that they consult Mrs. Chubb again. Mrs. Chubb's kitchen was fragrant with stewing apples and the unmistakable tang of mild panic. She met them with guarded civility, rallying her composure with every syllable. "I help where I can. Market, choir, raffles. Somebody must keep Flaxborough's wheels oiled. And I certainly didn't touch Greaves's basket. Sherry or not." Love nodded, jotting quietly. Purbright asked, "Why the biscuits yesterday for Docking?" Chubb barely hesitated. "We're committee friends. She likes jam-filled. I sent 6. She returned 2. Used the rest for the Flower Guild tea after the market closed." There was a fleeting inconsistency. Mrs. Docking had mentioned bringing a lunch bag, but not biscuits shared or returned. Purbright's mild gaze drifted to a stack of hymn sheets on the sideboard teased at the edges, one bearing the faint green numerals. These choir sheets, who bags them after service? Chubb shrugged, eyes averted. Sid or Peggy, sometimes Greaves if she's been fussing over arrangements. The hour pressed on, gossip at the Red Lion gathered new life with Bert creating a new set of odds. 10 to 1 it's Chubb, 8 to 1 it's Sid, Peggy's payout is low, she's got the keys. From the far end, Ivy observed loudly, market baskets always vanish before the Mayor's Parade Flower Guild wants to avoid council fees. By the next morning, Flaxborough's suspicion had settled, as such things do, into a general consensus that someone with access to both ribbons and keys, fond of choir lofts and market halls, must be responsible. Sid, Peggy, Mrs. Docking, Mrs. Axrill, and even Mrs. Chubb each acquired the title usual suspect, whispered, with relish and repeated with the unshakable logic of small towns everywhere. Purbright, however, remained untouched by certainty. He directed Sergeant Love to call on Reverend Plimsy, whose acquaintance with church supplies and committees had marked him as both witness and inadvertent instigator. Plimsy greeted them in the vestry, eyes beleaguered but with the ever-present whiff of disapproval. I distribute hymn sheets, yes, keys, stay with me, though Sid and Peggy borrow them for market events. The green print was meant for a harvest dinner. It got misplaced, surely. Baskets I never touch. Market prizes and sherry are Mrs. Docking's domain, and Greaves settles up the accounts. He paused. It's committee business, Inspector. These things get muddled. Love, his faith in administrative order flagging, pressed. All these hands on keys, how can anyone be sure of anything? Plimsy offered the resigned shrug of a man who'd lost innumerable flower arrangements to bureaucracy. You can't. That's Flaxborough, Sergeant. Nothing's ever as orderly as the ledger says. As Plimsy recounted that the night before the basket's disappearance, he had seen Wilfred Chubb loitering beneath the choir loft, talking numbers at the door and asking about market keys, a thread seemed to tighten. Later, as afternoon approached, Mrs. Axrill appeared at the station, hat askew, nervous energy barely restrained. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. So I counted my raffle tickets and noticed I was one short. Must have dropped it at the market, or someone took it. Purbright gently received the ticket book, its one torn stub, oddly larger than the rest, suggesting hasty removal rather than orderly perforation. There was, too, a faint smudge of green on the edge. Love indulged a more direct question. Mrs. Axrill, are you sure you didn't place anything in the choir loft yesterday? She paused, genuine confusion flickering. Number, I don't have keys for it. Only Sid or Peggy let me up. Choir loft is Sid's territory now, since the Flower Guild row. She offered a weak smile. If something's missing, Sid usually blames the pigeons. Purbright allowed himself an opaque smile and thanked her. When evening fell, fresh commotion drew them back to market. The Red Lion's window illuminated a fraught dinner gathering. Sid, red-faced, denied any basket larceny. Mrs. Docking threatened to call for recounts. Peggy announced her resignation from 2 committees in principle, neither accepted. As the meeting reached fever pitch, Bert stood, and, with the cunning of one who'd memorized every scandal since 1978, announced, "Last year, Docking lost a tray for 2 days and turned up in the choir. This is just another chapter in Flaxborough's devotion to obstacles. But if you ask me, the ones with green fingers, Greaves, Axrill, Peggy, and Sid, they all know something." The crowd nodded. Truth was rarely a single thread in town. Purbright caught Sergeant Love's eye. "What do you make of it, Love?" Love's response, earnest as ever, I think whoever took the prize is trying too hard to be ordinary, sir. Might be time we watch what's handed back instead of what's gone missing. Outside, the sky gathered itself, against the last chill of spring. Flaxborough's story advanced, not by leaps but careful steps, one ribbon, one card, and one committee feud at a time. The following morning, Flaxborough prepared for the first summer fete of the season with a grim sense of obligation. Every committee had sent its least contentious member to supervise bunting, tables, and the perilous urn of treacle toffee. Lawn games unfurled on the common. Mrs. Greaves's carnations, less regal for their limpness, vied against Sid's battered coconut shy for the day's most dubious distinction. Children, released from the shackles of arithmetic and restraint, darted between stalls, pocketing free samples with the discretion of seasoned politicians. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love arrived just as the church clock struck 10. The atmosphere was busy without being joyful, as if festivity was a duty Flaxborough bore bravely, like influenza. Gossip, however, bloomed with the vigour of docks in an untended bed. Every pocket of shade nurtured its own theory about bingo, baskets, and the persistent unreliability of those who ought to know better. "Morning," Inspector Burt called from the tombola, eyes bright with rumour, heard Sid's threatening to call in the police over missing raffle funds, and Greaves, she accused, docking of window-dressing the prize list. Wouldn't wonder if ribbons start a riot. Love groaned inwardly as they began their circuit. Mrs. Docking, surrounded by her loyalists, recounted for the 9th time the suspicious minutes during which she left the basket. "I only went to check on the tea mugs. Anyone could have slipped it away." Peggy said she saw movement by the market plinth, but that was surely Mrs. Axrill or Sid. You can trust neither with a decent bottle. Peggy, her resolve adjusted to the angle of the sun, defended herself briskly. "I was sorting raffle tickets for the fire brigade. If I'd taken the basket, I'd have claimed the kitchen implements. Can't get those in shops anymore." She summoned an ambiguous glance at Mrs. Chubb, who was distributing scones with missionary zeal. Sid, meanwhile, policed his coconut shy as if it were a border. "Anyone could have lifted the basket," he said, through clenched teeth. "Market's porous with too many spare keys. Committees, always more committees. If I had my way, I'd lock the lot and throw the key in the duck pond." Inspector Purbright, weaving quietly through the clamour, absorbed in detail the arrangement of folding chairs, one, as always, slightly shorter, the way Ivy's fish tent formed a stubborn bottleneck, and the presence of a new batch of green ribbons unusually, some adorning the mayor's tent. At noon, Purbright exchanged polite pleasantries with Reverend Plimsy. The Reverend's discomfort proved contagious. "Please try the bric-a-brac, but steer clear of the hymnals," he advised darkly. Purbright did, but not before noticing a hymn sheet, green-numbered yet again, being used as a makeshift scorecard by a bored junior choir boy. Sergeant Love collected statements while juggling scones, raffle tickets, and a running tally of sullen glances. Mrs. Axrill, summoned discreetly to the tea tent, had a theory at the ready. The Flower Guild and the choir are always feuding. If you ask me, Greaves wants the market prize to fail to prove a point about arrangements, though why anyone would want our sherry is beyond guessing. Love, ever diligent, inquired about keys. "Only Sid, Peggy, and I officially," Mrs. Axrill said, "but at least 24 others have had copies over the years. In Flaxborough, keys multiply like old secrets." The fate's highlight was meant to be the mayor's speech, but it was upstaged by a sudden commotion at the charity bric-a-brac. Bert's son, red-faced and victorious, waved something above the crowd. "Found it! The missing basket behind the treacle barrel." A flurry of townsfolk gathered. Mrs. Greaves swooned theatrically as Mrs. Docking inspected the prize. The carnations were limp, the sherry unbroken, and the kitchen implements, after a quick inventory, were declared present, if undistinguished. Everyone expected the fuss to subside, but controversy is Flaxborough's cement. "That's not the original ribbon," Mrs. Chubb announced decisively, prodding the green bow. Greaves ties a left under right. This is right under left. Greaves, regaining composure, sniffed. Counterfeit ribbons now? I suppose next we'll suspect counterfeit scones. Sid, arms folded, looked ready for anything. That barrel's always unlocked. Flowers go missing there every time children are let loose. Peggy, notebook at the ready, detailed the sequence of the morning. Basket vanished after Docking left her tea. Axrill passed by, Sid fixed the croquet hoop, and Chubb adjusted the bunting. I was at the tomb asking Bert. Love did, and Bert confirmed. Peggy never left. Chubb was ferreting from the coconut shy. Axrill wandered, but her hat's hard to miss. For Purbright, the fate's energy began to spiral. Too many people eager to reframe the story, and too many rivals with overlapping grievances. Through it all, he picked up one significant detail. A faint smudge of green ribbon dye on Sid's cuff, quickly wiped when he noticed Purbright watching. He motioned Love aside. We need to know where the ribbons are truly kept and who picked them up this morning. Love found the answer from Mrs. Greaves, now rallying her forces at the lemonade stand. Prize ribbons went missing last night. I meant to collect them at 7, but Peggy said Sid needed repairs in the storeroom. The basket was wrapped late. I went up to the loft at 10 to find Chubb and Docking fetching choir books. Neither said a word about the basket. Purbright mused on the web, Sid busy with keys and lights, Chubb loitering and bearing biscuits, Greaves possessed of timing but no certain witness of her own, and Peggy everywhere but never alone. Mrs. Axrill, perhaps the least threat, remained a prime scapegoat by virtue of being accident-prone. Before he could voice a conclusion, a shrill whistle interrupted Bert's son again, this time pale. "There's writing inside the basket." He pulled a folded slip from beneath the last carnation. "Arrangements must be respected. Beware numbers that do not add up." The message was unsigned, but the type faintly echoed last night's note. Peggy gasped. Docking exclaimed, "Enough is enough!" Sid cursed softly. Everyone looked to Inspector Purbright, but he quietly observed the crowd, face impassive as the mayor's gavel. Love murmured, "It's a warning, sir, about numbers, arrangements, flowers, and choir placements. The next mix-up won't be so easy to tidy up." And so, Purbright said gently, "We shall watch and wait, which, in Flaxborough, yields far more than running about." The fete wore on, the sun arcing behind the rectory in resigned silence. But the old tensions, now reignited, promised further scandal, and somewhere in the crowd the culprit, emboldened or desperate, was already plotting the next move. By afternoon, the fete began its slow collapse into the routines of clean-up. Stray bunting drooped from trestle tables, the last of the coconut balls rolled under shrubs, and the aroma of spilled sherry mingled with the unmistakable tang of trampled carnations. Inspector Purbright, never one for the centre of revelry, drifted quietly at the event's margins, observing more in the aftermath than most saw during the excitement. Sergeant Love, clipboard in hand, made polite inquiries, mollifying tempers and adding to his increasingly intricate chart of suspects, timings, and missing or inexplicably multiplied ribbons. It did not escape Purbright that Sid, arms dusted with whitewash and with a look about him of injured innocence, had made a sudden, silent exit after the warning note in the raffle basket. Peggy lingered close to Mrs. Docking, wordlessly reconciling ticket sales with a mental ledger that appeared to favour expediency over arithmetic. Mrs. Chubb stacked chairs in tight rows, clearly irritated by the day's confusion, while Mrs. Greaves, bracelets jangling, barked administrative orders at Flower Guild deputies like a general pressed by defeat. Children were herded home, and Bert swept the tombola into a single, battered box. "Sooner or later, you'll find it was all over nothing," he opined cheerfully, "except sherry and pride." Purbright considered this with a faint smile. In Flaxborough, sherry and pride had triggered more investigations than larceny ever could. As twilight settled, the remaining adults gathered in the church hall for a committee debrief, a regular custom usually intended as a defence against the post-mortem gossip that started before the last scone was consumed. Today's meeting began with uncommon urgency. Mrs. Greaves demanded, with the force of custom and the righteousness of one whose carnations had been manhandled, somebody must accept responsibility for these disruptions. If not, the Guild will have no confidence in future joint events. Peggy, always practical, replied, "It's impossible to maintain order when the choir, flower guild and market all swap keys, ribbons and cards as they please. Perhaps we should keep everything locked and let the tradesmen take their chances." Wilfred Chubb, present for the raffle but far less than comfortable, ventured, "Baskets and cards aren't complicated. Only someone bored or resentful would sneak around swapping numbers, leaving notes or changing arrangements. What's next, a surprise at the mayor's tea?" Sid bristled at this. "Anyone here could have pocketed the basket in the confusion. Ribbons turn up in every committee bag. I won't be scapegoated for traditions even if I don't understand them." Sergeant Love, sensing the rising squabble, cleared his throat ostentatiously. "Best if we all stick to facts. Whoever left the notes and shifted the prizes knows both old and new routines for where things are kept and when rooms are empty." What changed this year to unsettle everything? Mrs. Docking, scanning the faces, answered with rare directness. Peggy's new system had fewer double checks and everyone was trusted to collect and return supplies. Less paperwork, it's meant less fuss, but sometimes too little supervision tempts mischief. Or, Mrs. Greaves added archly, letting certain personalities arrange things to their own liking unopposed. There was a silence during which several committee members felt visible. Everyone believes themselves better than the chaos, and yet the chaos always returns. Purbright finally spoke, his tone polite and level, drawing in even the most combative listeners. This year, tensions have mounted around who arranges the market and choir events. Several old privileges have been lost, and there are new hands at old locks. Have any of you noticed small slights, missing objects, or confidences misplaced before the bingo confusion? Peggy considered. One guild key lost 2 weeks ago was found in the postbox outside Sid's workshop. Some choir programs were misprinted. The choir's rehearsal times changed, and the Flower Guild lost a Sunday slot to a bake sale. She ticked off each point with a detached calm that betrayed, beneath its logic, a quiet exhaustion. Mrs. Chubb looked up. Last bake sale, the flour tins went missing for an hour and were later found stacked by the vestry. People said Sid was fixing the drain, but who really knows who comes and goes? Wilfred, growing restless, remembered, "And those numbers on the bingo cages, someone inverted the labels the week before last." I thought it was Sid's idea of a joke, but perhaps not. From across the room, Ivy's nasal tones drifted in from the open foyer. People forget how fast things get swapped or hidden in the market. Last spring, those prize eggs disappeared and showed up painted pink in the next town over. And still, only 3 people had keys by the last count, but everyone found a way in. As evening deepened and coffee urns spouted more grumbling than refreshment, Purbright listened carefully for notes of bitterness or old injury. Mrs. Axrill, quietly attending, recounted to Love a vague memory from the bingo night, a shadowy figure by the vestry, indistinct but hurried, as if avoiding recognition. Tall, with a coat but nothing certain, not Sid or Peggy, someone more stooped. She apologized for her poor sight, but Love listened, detail by detail, until her answers ran out. As the meeting broke up, Mrs. Greaves, in an unguarded moment, confided to Purbright, People hate being moved from their traditions. Give up one little habit, and they'll do anything to get it back or make someone pay. Outside, the streetlights blinked to life. Flaxborough's restless secrets once again slipped between lamplight and shadow, a missing basket, a green ribbon, and the congregation of notes inexplicably timed and tied to each event's unravelling. In each, Purbright detected not only the hand of mischief, but also the echo of old scores hidden but far from forgotten. As the committee meeting dissolved into groups tenaciously dissecting scandal, Purbright let himself drift from the thickest gossip toward quieter eddies. The last rays of evening sun dusted the market square, a stage still graced by half-collapsed bunting and the bittersweet residue of clashing ambitions. Sergeant Love, notebook heavy with contradictory accounts, followed at a thoughtful distance, mulling over the dramas repeated in 5 different and equally improbable voices. Flaxborough's public life, Purbright knew, was never strictly logical. Beneath routines lay a churn of minor betrayals, remedied by ritual or, as now, public spectacle. The recent mishaps had left nerves frayed, reputations bruised, and at least one committee chair vowing to chair nothing ever again. Mrs. Axrill lingered at the edge of the square, clutching a faded raffle book as if it contained something valuable and dangerous. Purbright greeted her gently, and she replied with a sigh of relief that betrayed sleepless nights and too many cups of weak tea. "Inspector, it's just been too much. I could barely think at the meeting, with everyone looking for someone to blame and half suspecting themselves. Peggy asked me if I really remembered that shadow by the vestry, and now I'm not sure it wasn't a trick of the light." He reassured her with a mild nod and thanked her for the hint about the torn ticket stub. The faint green smudge, still visible, felt emblematic of a quiet joke at the expense of Flaxborough's obsession with systems. Love jotted down Axrill's worries, including her confusion over choir schedules, and an odd conversation with Mrs. Chubb about flower orders mislaid weeks before. "Isn't it strange," Axrill pondered, "how little things bend out of shape when people stop trusting one another?" Peggy emerged from the town hall with her perennial stack of forms and a faintly harassed look. Purbright intercepted her mid-stride. "Peggy, about the ribbons. Can you account for the green batch used at the fete? Did you notice if Sid borrowed any after the market?" Peggy exhaled in irritation. "We never have enough. Sid took 4 for repairs or so, he said. Docking used at least 2 for the basket, and Mrs. Chubb asked for some for decorations. I try to track them, but they disappear." After the warning note, Greaves threatened to bring in her own supply and lock it in her flat. Love asked about door keys, another mystery. Sid keeps the master set for maintenance, but every committee member claims a right to their own. At last count, 12 keys circulated, but Bert swears he saw a copy made at the ironmonger's last month. Details accumulated. Mrs. Chubb verified she'd collected ribbons from Peggy twice for different events, but denied any design on the market basket. That prize is always more drama than substance. Greaves guards it, Docking craves it, and Sid resents it. I only wanted the ribbons for the mayor's tent, which, by the way, was moved at the last minute and ruffled 3 committees. Her tone, part confession, part complaint, landed with the honesty of someone who'd spent too many years as Flaxborough's mediator. Wilfred Chubb, nipping in from the pub, provided the day's most artful deflection. "Inspector, all I did was run the raffle. Baskets are trouble every season and ribbons always go missing, especially when Peggy's behind in the accounts. If you ask me, half the suspicions in this town originate from how many ways there are to mislay a market basket." Love made further notations, glancing askance at Sid as he repaired the church sign in an elaborate show of attention. Sid's normally steady hands fidgeted with a coil of green ribbon. Love pressed. "About yesterday, Sid. Why did you need the ribbons after repairs?" Sid bristled. "Told Peggy I needed them for tying up, padded pew backs an old tradition. Greaves said she'd watch, but she never came. I was alone in the loft for an hour. Anyone could have come in through the vestry or hall. And yes, I changed a bulb, but only after the choir left rehearsal. Anything gone missing wasn't because of me. The early evening drew a stream of parishioners past the square, each contributing commentary. Bert's wife argued that the warning notes were part of a long-standing local rivalry between the Flower Guild and choir. Ivy, at her fish stall, remarked that the basket wasn't worth the fuss unless someone meant to make a point. Children repeated phrases overheard from adults, giving them new, more perilous context. As Love and Purbright slowly traversed the streets, more was revealed in gesture than statement. Mrs. Docking, pausing outside the Red Lion, recounted seeing Mrs. Chubb and Peggy conferring by the market plinth just before the basket vanished. "I think someone meant to move things around, just to show who runs. Events, Sid always resents committee orders. Greaves can't abide Peggy's accounting." Sifting through the multi-layered squabbles, Purbright identified a theme. The missing and misused objects, baskets, ribbons and cards were signals, less of actual theft and more of social chess. In Flaxborough, embarrassment was currency. To lose was to be shamed, unless one could shift the blame. Love remarked, "The real mix-up, sir, is how everyone expects to be suspected. Even Axrill, with her nerves, feels the trouble's her fault." Sid shows guilt, but only about the smallest things. No one's really certain what went missing, only who ought to answer for it. Purbright agreed, eyes fixed on the market hall clock as the hour stretched past its chime. "That is exactly how mischief breeds longevity in a town like ours," he said quietly. With dusk deepening, Flaxborough seemed as restless as its inhabitants. All the scattered clues, green ribbons, choir sheets, missing keys, and warning notes now appeared not as direct evidence, but as meaningful gestures layered by old rivalry and new opportunity. As the moon rose, Flaxborough's market square exchanged the busy day's casual disorder for the careful stillness of night. Shop windows flickered with the last lamplight, and the great doors of St. Ermentrude's held their secrets behind heavy oak. Inspector Purbright responded to a final call. Mrs. Docking had reported another disturbance, this time not in the market or committee hall, but within the very sanctuary of the church itself. The hymn number board had changed. 7, denoting the simple closing hymn, was replaced by 97, a number that did not correspond to any service or sheet, green-printed or otherwise. Sergeant Love arrived in time to see Purbright gazing up at the altered board, which cast a strange, slanted shadow onto the flagstones. It was a scene that seemed innocuous to most, but in Flaxborough the unexpected always had meaning. Nearby were Mrs. Axrill, still troubled, and Sid, disgruntled by the implication that someone had again disturbed his domain. Love noted the assembly as carefully as he would name in a ledger where they were every recent suspect drawn by something subtle or by compulsion. Mrs. Docking, fluttering, explained, "I came to fetch the last of the hymn sheets." "Peggy said you wanted one, Inspector. The board was correct at Vespers. I left it at 7. Returning now, it's 97. Sid swears he didn't touch it. Greaves says she always checks the board after choir, but that number can't be right. And yet I remember Purbright mentioned 97 when he found the sheet after bingo." Love agreed. The odd recurrence prickled. "Green 97 on that hymn sheet in the piano was the first thing you picked up, sir, after the bingo commotion." Mrs. Axrill shifted anxiously. "Numbers have been peculiarly out of place, Inspector. At the raffle, my ticket stub was torn, different from the rest. At the bingo, the card Wilfred took instead of his. It's as if someone wanted to start a sequence, not just a single muddle." Peggy arrived sorting the lost hymn sheets. There aren't 97 hymns, not in our set. That board's been stuck since the repairs last winter. Sid fixed it, remember, Inspector? When he changed the bulb? She fixed Sid with the careful gaze of someone counting both facts and shortcomings. Sid grunted defensively. I changed bulbs, yes, and fixed the board's catch. But the numbers? Only Greaves and Docking use the board regularly outside of services. Purbright considered Sid, whose denials were always delivered with such sincerity that they made truth elusive. Sid, has anyone borrowed your keys since the last committee, or did you leave the vestry unlocked for another repair? Sid exhaled. Peggy borrowed keys for the Wednesday market setup. Axrill needed the choir loft open last Tuesday. Mrs. Docking, she's got her own arrangements and never lets me near those. But no, I haven't touched the number board except as asked. Peggy observed. Would someone wanting to send a signal use green, but only if they knew how to work the catch? She eyed the assembled group, each shifting notes and hymn sheets around in practical futility. Purbright refrained from direct comment, instead examining the slot and hinge of the board. It showed microscopic fragments of green ribbon, nearly pressed flat. He pocketed the evidence as Love confirmed, ribbons, hymn sheets and bingo cards, always green and always just slightly wrong. Mrs. Greaves joined, bristling at the night-time inquiry. I checked the board after choir, as I do. 97 is someone's jest. Sid's repairs have been spotty, and Peggy's numbers hardly help. Last year, Mrs. Axrill moved the board herself after a tea spill, but this number it's meant to unsettle. Chubb ambled in, summoned by some internal registry of trouble. I ran the raffle, but as for hymns, you'd want a choir mistress or market supervisor. Docking won't even let me stage prizes without 3 forms. Mrs. Docking corrected him. You confuse forms with permissions. I keep an eye on the board, but I did not touch it tonight. She glanced at Greaves. You said last month, if numbers change, suspect the choir, never the market. Greaves bristled. Because only the choir pays excess for new boards, Love asked gently. Was anything else changed tonight? Sid, did any other repairs need doing? Sid shook his head. I was asked to check the heating. Nothing else. Axrill asked for the choir loft, but left before I finished. Axrill's protest was meek. I had my book, and the numbers were in order then. The group stood in the strange hush of the nave, each watching Purbright, whose composure served as both anchor and veil. He studied the green fragments and the pattern of numbers presented, and his mind began to sort the inconsistencies in silence. The feeling of a staged distraction grew stronger, not so much a puzzle as a deliberate provocation. In the square, as townsfolk drifted from the market pub, Bert and Ivy exchanged theories. Maybe Sid moved the board to frame Peggy. Maybe Greaves wants more attention for the choir. Axrill's anxiety is contagious, and Chubb's always mixing things. The news of 97 at church spread, adding a fresh layer of outrage and sardonic laughter. Purbright led Sergeant Love to survey the choir loft one last time. There, beside the books, they found a pile of unused green ribbons, a single torn raffle ticket tucked amidst them, and a market prize list with 2 names scratched in green ink, Peggy's and Sid's. The sum of evidence pointed not to intent of theft, but to an elaborate choreography, one orchestrated in small, calculated moves. Love, observing the faint chaos, said quietly, "It's becoming a dance, sir. Whoever has their hands in everything knows everyone's blind spots. Arrangements moved, numbers misaligned, each event triggered by a harmless misstep, but together they're not quite natural." Purbright nodded, folding the torn ticket and green ribbon together in a small paper slip. "Tomorrow we ask, not for what is missing or changed, but for who had reasons to rearrange the whole pattern. With the restoration of silence, the market square's drama pulsed just beneath the surface, ripe for another disruption, another clue, another layer to unravel. Morning in Flaxborough broke with a sullen drizzle. The market square, sodden beneath grey skies, held only the most resolute of traders, muffled against damp and circumstance. Yet beneath this monochrome surface, speculation burned brighter than ever. The scandal of the church number board, shuffled market prizes and fractured committee trust had reached its crescendo. Inspector Purbright moved among the townsfolk with the quiet assurance of one waiting for turbulence to settle, eyes sharp behind the mild mask. Sergeant Love, duty-bound and thorough, read the church's boiler report while peering discreetly at ribbons curled in the choir loft. No sign of forced entry, sir. Last night's group left at 10. Only Sid's key was signed out, but anyone could have borrowed it. They're as routine as ration coupons in the war. Sid worries that the pattern is against him now, Purbright observed, not unkindly. Everyone suspects everyone else. If we test the pattern quietly, perhaps its true architect will reveal themselves. To this end, Purbright proposed a simple experiment. He arranged a subtle reordering of the market prize schedule, telling Peggy but no one else that the Flower Guild would take the late afternoon slot rather than the morning. He placed a single green ribbon conspicuously atop the prize basket and instructed Sergeant Love to circulate rumours at the Red Lion that Inspector Purbright was interested in mismatched ribbons and that a new raffle ticket sequence would start at lunch. The test, like all Purbright's inquiries, escaped the shape of official investigation, blending into the town's own endless games of cause and consequence. The pub regulars responded as expected. Bert, eager for fresh odds, declared, "If ribbons move, so will accusations. Has Sid had enough? Did Peggy stray too often?" Ivy, between customers, suggested Docking's fingerprints are everywhere. Axrill's nerves always fumble. The circle around the bar bubbled with speculation, and word trickled out to the market, the guild and the vestry before midday. Purbright watched the impact of rumour with the patience of a fisherman. By noon, Mrs. Docking appeared at the station, her composure ruffled. "Peggy's schedule is all wrong. Greaves insists on new ribbons. Sid says his key was missing this morning and claims Axtell borrowed it, but she denies it. Wilfred Chubb reported a jumble among prize books and a missing tea towel, which he blames on choir mishaps." At the church, Mrs. Greaves arrived, complaining about the Flower Guild's changed timing. Sid followed, complaining about locked cupboards and Docking's tea towels. Peggy met the pair on the steps, flush with confusion and apologetic. "It's all gotten out of hand, Inspector. This ribbon, someone moved it from the prize shelf. Chubb says he saw Axrill with a heap of raffle tickets, but she claims she was only counting. Greaves refuses to use anything but her own green ribbons now." Purbright listened, not interfering, content with the spread of disruption. Everything was moving, ribbons, keys, numbers, but more importantly, so were tempers and allegiances. The market report came in. Mrs. Chubb had reordered next week's raffle to allow Wilfred to oversee the draw, a novelty that caused the choir mistress to protest and Docking to mutter about meddling hands. Sergeant Love, reliably tactful, staged a brief interview with Mrs. Axel at the bowl of lemons outside the grocer. "Did you take Sid's key?" Axrill looked faintly distressed. "Never. I asked him to check the choir loft and he insisted he'd handle it. I counted tickets while Mrs. Chubb arranged the display. I haven't been near the ribbons since last week." Love relayed the statement to Purbright as Sid arrived, hands full of flower pins, gaze heavy. "She's anxious, not a thief." Sid's tone softened. By afternoon, the first cracks appeared in the quiet confrontations. Peggy, exhausted, confided to Mrs. Greaves that she suspected Mrs. Docking had moved the ribbon out of guilt, not malice. Docking worries, Greaves plots, Sid sulks, and Axrill doubts herself. Even Wilfred Chubb is at sea, never sure what's real from what's rumoured. Purbright called the group together in the market hall, produced the single green ribbon and a torn ticket, and asked them each, one by one, when last they'd seen either object. Sid, staring at the ribbon, confessed, "I moved it yesterday, but only to tie up the plinth after repairs." Mrs. Chubb, prompted about the ticket, confessed she might have torn an extra stub in haste, wanting to finish sorting before choir practice. Mrs. Docking admitted she'd left her tea towel near the choir loft only to find it missing and replaced by ribbons, which she assumed indicated guild mischief. Mrs. Greaves, finally, admitted to replacing a short ribbon on the market basket, saying, "Nothing would hold it, Inspector. Everything was slippery yesterday, and I didn't trust Sid's knots." As each admission, so carefully tailored by Purbright's gentle questioning, drew out these minor truths, Sergeant Love remarked, "It's a network of small confessions, sir. Not one master thief, but a committee's worth of anxious rearrangers." Purbright nodded. What is accidental and what is intentional now stands clearer, but someone yet remains unaccounted for. "Peggy, what about the schedule?" Peggy hesitated, eyes bright behind fatigue. "I gave Chubb the schedule last night, asked Docking to confirm. She said she'd pass it to Axtell, but I never saw it again." The day edged toward closing. Purbright quietly observed everyone's reaction as the Flower Guild's prize slot was moved, as ribbons swapped hands, as keys and tickets turned up and were claimed, and as each suspect, in their own way, revealed evidence more of confusion and rivalry than genuine malice. All the while he watched for one sign of the overcorrection, the anxious defence, and the silence that spoke too loudly. Late in the afternoon, Sid fumbled his keys, Peggy wept softly over her ledgers, Mrs. Docking demanded new towels, Axrill insisted on recounts, and Mrs. Chubb withdrew to the choir loft, where Love found her staring at the green ribbon's frayed edges. Purbright joined her, offering the torn ticket. When things go missing, often it's because someone hopes too eagerly to restore order. Mrs. Chubb met his gaze, uncertain, then nodded. Everyone's so desperate not to be blamed. Purbright silently handed her the ribbon. She held it as if it could untie the many knots left in the wake of Flaxborough's latest storm. Inspector Purbright chose the vestry for his final assembly. Sunlight filtered in stripes across the polished wood, and the air hummed with distant market activity. The usual suspects arranged themselves uneasily. Mrs. Axrill with her clutch of raffle tickets, Sid rubbing at an old scuff in the floor, Peggy hunched behind her ledger, Mrs. Docking crisp and defensive, Mrs. Greaves bristling over carnation pins, Mrs. Chubb pale beneath the brim of her best hat, and Wilfred carrying a towel as if it were a shield. Sergeant Love stood nearby, notebook poised like a prayer for peace. Purbright began without apology or accusation, just the mild civility that masked keen scrutiny. "I am grateful you all gathered. Sometimes a town cannot see its own reflection until it sits together." Several shifted uneasily, sensing the last piece of a puzzle before them, and not certain whether they'd solved it or become part of it. He laid out, one at a time, the green ribbons, the torn stub, the mismatched bingo card, and the faintly smudged raffle book. Each item summoned a new layer of embarrassment or regret. We've seen missing baskets, rearranged numbers, altered hymnboards, and warnings in baskets, Purbright said, voice soft but level. Everyone has been blamed, most have blamed someone else, and not one of you, I think, truly remembers the moment the disruptions began. But disruptions in Flaxborough never begin with mischief. They arise out of habit, pride, and a quiet wish to be indispensable. Love, with a glance at the room's tension, remarked, "It's true." Every incident seemed the result of good intentions until lines were crossed and rivalry crept in. Purbright nodded. What happened was not a plot by a lone saboteur, but a cascade of small acts, missing ribbons, borrowed keys, and notes meant half in jest and half in warning. The confusion over cards and baskets began as a forgotten mix-up, but the anxiety that followed drew everyone in. Sid, you tied plinths with ribbons meant for prizes, trying to fix what was hastily planned. Peggy, your accounting was meant to clarify but was used as an excuse for frustration. Mrs. Docking your towel signalled an arrangement, but its disappearance became gossip. Chubb, you swapped schedules to prevent trouble, only to seed suspicion. Mrs. Still, your nervous counting mixed up tickets and cards, feeding the idea of mischief. And Mrs. Greaves, your insistence on the right knot turned every missing ribbon into high drama. As the group absorbed this, Mrs. Docking protested, "But the notes, the warnings! Surely they're not mere coincidences," Purbright replied. "Notes were left by more than one hand." Mrs. Chubb's anxiety led her to warn the guild. Peggy left a jesting slip for Sid about arrangements copied by Axtell, who hoped to avoid blame after her mistake. Choir loft messages were meant to remind Greaves of ribbon knots. Each was prompted by an honest, if overly cautious, desire to anticipate trouble. Greaves flushed. And the board? Why 97? Purbright opened the hymn sheet, green 97, and handed it to Sid. "Sid, you used the old green sheets for repairs, confusing numbers, and in the dark set 97 on the board, hoping it would remind Greaves to reorder the hymnal. You didn't mean to start a fuss." Sid's shame was plain. The room's tension began to slacken. Love, peering over his notebook, added, "Every attempt to prevent confusion deepened it." The missing basket wasn't stolen, just mislaid during Chubb's overzealous rearrangement. The torn ticket was Axrill's, dropped by accident. Peggy managed a tight smile. "So you're saying no one did it? Not properly?" Purbright's final insight carried warmth as well as quiet authority. "Scandal here is a communal act, a sum of neighbourly worry, too many keys, traditions jealously guarded, and secrets too small to declare. The note in the basket and the green ribbons are each a reminder that arrangements, whether of flowers or friendships, are never foolproof. Relieved but chastened, each resident found room for explanation." Mrs. Chubb passed the green ribbon to Greaves in silent apology. Docking offered Peggy a new tea towel. Sid agreed to restore the choir loft with anybody present who wished. Axrill, clutching her stub, declared she would keep better track. Wilfrid resolved to announce winning numbers only with 2 witnesses. Peace returned, rebuilt on tiny compromises and the enduring logic of small-town survival. Flaxborough, by sundown, hummed with contented rumour. The market raffle resumed smoothly, the Flower Guild found unity in a new pattern for bows, and the church hymn board gleamed with conventional numbers. Inspector Purbright received, as always, a quiet nod from parishioners, and Sergeant Love received the gratitude of a town familiar with siege and relief, both comic and genuine. As Purbright and Love strolled past the market, the detective commented, voice soft amid renewed gossip, "Sometimes the truth is not to be found in what is missing, but in all the effort made to cover it." Love smiled. "And that, sir, is Flaxborough's real arrangement.